Rachel, you just have no idea what a day like today does for an old man like me. Now, I know, you're getting fed up with the whole thing. I think it's time you take Zach and head for home. It looks like he's time for a nap, and your husband probably wants some supper before too long. So, thanks again. I really appreciate it. It's been great. Quite a pleasant scene, isn't it? Grandpa, his daughter, grandson. We had a great day together. Except, it's not always been that way. It wasn't that long ago that I thought I would never again experience the land of the living. What's that? Was I dead? Well, in a manner of speaking. But let me go back to the beginning, or at least to try. 15 years ago, I was the village potter. Now, I don't want to brag, mind you, but I was good. If it could be made out of clay at one time or another, I probably made it. Yeah, maybe it's because I liked playing in mud when I was a boy. But from little on up, I was hanging around old Tobias's pottery shop. He didn't seem to mind. Began to leave me help with the cleaning up. And Mom and Dad seemed okay with it too. Perhaps they knew that Tobias really was a good man. But old Tobias kind of took me under his wing, I think's the expression. He left me hang around the shop there, and then he left me help do the cleaning up, and then he would take me with him as he went to get the water, and he took me out and showed me where he got the different kinds of clay for the different things that we would make. Well, as I got older, Tobias began to send me out to the village well to bring back the water. And he sent me out to the riverbanks to bring back the different kinds of clay. Then he began to let me help to tread the mud as we made the bricks. And before long, I was the person making the bricks for the houses and for the ovens. I remember the day when Tobias left me on the pottery wheel for the first time. I knew that this was where I wanted to be. And at first it was just turning the simple bowls, the simple cups. But then he let me begin to make the more complicated pieces. Well, life was good. It wasn't easy, but it was good. I met Naomi and we got married. And then Rachel came along, and then Aaron. Yes, we worked. We worked from sun up to sundown. And life got kind of complicated at times. It was always unpredictable. We didn't know who in the village would get ill next, or when the Romans would come through and want even more taxes. But life was good. On the Sabbath, we would go to the synagogue and listen to the Torah. What's that? What's the Torah? What's a synagogue? Well, the Torah was the ancient scriptures. That was the writings that God gave to his people. In the Torah, we learned how God wanted us to live and what we were supposed to do. And the synagogue, what's this place? A meeting house, a church? Yeah, something like that. But let me tell you, we never had benches like this. Well, where was I? Oh yeah, life was good. But then I began to notice these spots on my hands. Now, at first, I didn't think anything about it. I mean, I'm a potter. I work in mud, in clay, with water. And yes, your hands get dry and they crack, and sometimes you get sores, and then the sores go away. Call it an occupational hazard, if you will. But these spots, they didn't go away. And at first, I just thought it was a nuisance. I didn't pay that much attention to it. But then came that one evening. Naomi was in the house with the children, and I was tending the fire. But I was distracted. There was some commotion going on over at the house next door. And I began to smell burning flesh. And I looked down, and it was me. I had grabbed the wrong end of the stick. The coals were burning my hand. But I didn't feel anything. And in that moment, I cannot describe the chill, the terror, the horror that came over me. For in that moment, I knew I had leprosy. I was afraid. I was afraid for me. I was afraid for Naomi. I was afraid for the children. What would they do? What would happen to them? What would happen to me? You don't understand? Well, for people who had leprosy, they were required by the laws of our people to be cut off. They had to live outside the village. Never again would I be allowed to talk to Naomi. Never again would I be allowed to hold my children or even to speak to them. I didn't know what to do. I told Naomi, and she too was shocked and terrified. We held each other, we cried. We thought about running away, briefly, but there was no place we could go. No one would take us in. Who would ever buy a cup from a potter who was a leper? We called the priest. And yes, the priest confirmed what we already knew. I had leprosy. And yes, I was banished. According to the laws of our people, Naomi and the children were isolated for 2 weeks. They did not have the disease. Praise God for that. But I was cut off. I was scared for Naomi. I was scared for the children. How would they survive? How would I survive? I was condemned to join the land of the dead. That's what we called them. Those wretched creatures. Often their noses were gone. Hands were claws. And they often stumbled around on crutches. Their feet mere stubs. And yes, many of them were blind. That's what I was destined to become. No, it wasn't that bad yet, but there was no hope. All that loomed in front of me was a terrible black chasm. was forever cut off. For a while, Naomi would help me with food. I don't know how she did it, but somehow once or twice a week, I would see her coming across the field, and she would put the food down and then beckon for me to come to get the food before anyone else would take it. How long did that continue? I don't know. 2 years? 3 years? But then one week, Naomi no longer came. Nor did she come the next week or the week after that. I watched from the village. I watched the village from the hill across the valley. All was quiet around our house. But then the crying began, and the screams and the wails. And I knew. I just knew. Naomi was gone. I cried. I cried for Naomi. I cried for the children. I cried for myself. Who would watch after the children? What would happen to them? Well, several weeks later, I saw them again. They were with Rebecca, Naomi's sister. I knew that Rebecca and her family were good people. Apparently, they had taken in Rachel and Aaron. They were good people, but they were also poor people. How would they fare? Well, I watched. Always from a distance, of course. I was not allowed to get anywhere close. Rachel was growing into a beautiful young woman. Aaron was growing into a strong young man. I was grateful for that. That was the one bright part of an otherwise dismal experience. I watched Rachel the day she got married. And no, I couldn't go. I stood in a tree on the hillside across the valley. I wanted so much to be there for her, but I was not allowed. And the disease took its toll. My hands, once so capable and strong, as I lost the feeling, the hands became crippled. The fingers became infected and rotted away. And my feet also became diseased. The flesh rotted away. I bandaged them the best I could. I was one of those poor creatures now, shuffling along. And yes, I too began to lose my eyesight. Not all at once, mind you, but gradually. And I knew that the darkness of my soul would soon be a physical darkness as well. Then came that very remarkable day. As I was going down the road, shuffling along on my crutch, I saw Jesus coming. How do I know it was Jesus? I don't know. That there was something different about this person. I felt an attraction. I shuffled my way. I felt at his feet. If you want to, you can make me clean. Jesus said, I do. And then he did the most remarkable thing. He stretched out his hand. And he touched me. Me. The dirty, crippled leper. Jesus touched me. And in that moment, in that most remarkable moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of comfort and peace. And I knew that regardless of whatever else happened, I was a beloved child of God. And everything was going to be okay. Whether or not I still had the leprosy, whatever else happened, I knew I would be okay. But as I knelt there, feeling that amazing peace and calm, I looked up to Jesus and I could see his face. And I looked at my hands and my fingers were straight and clear. And I looked at my feet. They were there. And my arms, my skin, it was as clear as a baby's. I was healed. I shouted. I laughed. I cried. And I looked at Jesus, and Jesus was just standing there with a smile in his face, looking like he was having the time of his life. I too became a follower of Jesus. No, I was not part of that group that traveled with him. But I knew that there was something just wonderfully special about this person. And I listened with great interest, as did many others, as the stories came back to our village. That Jesus touched and healed people. That Jesus taught in a way that was completely different from what the religious leaders were teaching. That Jesus taught us that God was not remote and distant, but that God wanted to be a loving daddy to each one of us. And yes, we knew that some people did not like Jesus. I couldn't understand why. And yes, we heard with shock and sadness that Jesus had been arrested and Jesus had been crucified. But very soon after that, the disciples were saying that they had seen him alive, that God had raised him from the dead. I'm just a simple potter. I don't know what all this means, but I believe. I believe that Jesus is God's anointed, the one who was sent to take away the sins of the world. I believe that Jesus touched me. I know that Jesus touched me. I believe he wants to touch you as well. That's my story. It can be yours.
Mark 1:40 to 45. A man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, "If you're willing, you can make me clean." Filled with compassion, Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I'm willing," he said, "be clean." Immediately the leprosy left him and he was cured. Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. "See that you don't tell this to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest and offer sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them." Instead, he went out and began to talk freely, spreading the good news. As a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed outside in the lonely places. Yet the people still came to him from everywhere.